Hello, and welcome to another episode of my podcast, The Global Agora. My name is Andrej Matišak, and I work as the Deputy Head of Foreign Desk in Slovak Daily Pravda, which, by the way, means truth, and it's not Russian Pravda. The Norwegian newspaper, the Barents Observer, is taking the Russian General Prosecutor's office to court for declaring the media outlet a so-called undesirable organization. I think that the Russian authorities are very afraid of independent media. We publish in Russian, so we do have an audience inside the country, said Barents Observer publisher Atle Stolesen to me. I met him in 2014 when I visited Kirkenes, the Norwegian town on the border with Russia. We talked about how the Barents Observer stands up to pressure from Russian officials, and also about how concerned Norway is about a potential Russian attack. Listen to our conversation. If you enjoy what I do, please support me on Coffee. For the link, see also a description of this episode. And now, up to the new debate. Atle, let's start with a few words about your newspaper, the Barents Observer. Who are you and what are you doing?
The Barents Observer is based and located on the border to Russia in northern Norway. Our office is only about 10-12 kilometers from the Russian border. So Norway's border to the Russian Kola Peninsula. So we are in the northernmost part of Europe on the coast of the Barents Sea. So our newspaper has, over the last almost 25 years, done journalism, cross-border journalism in this region between the countries, across the borders, focusing on the Arctic, northern Russia, the Kola Peninsula, issues like climate, security policy, industry, and much more. So this is where we are working a small team of journalists. We are a few Norwegians and a few Russian journalists in exile journalists who came over after Russia started the full-scale war against Ukraine. Kirkenes is actually a very nice place to do journalism. It's a very small place, but the location is good. We have Finland and the European Union very close. We have northern Norway. We have Russia and the Kola Peninsula next door. And we have all the activities that take place at sea, shipping, energy, and the Arctic archipelagos north of us. So this is actually a small and cozy town located in a geopolitical, very interesting area.
The Barents Observer is now taking the Russian General Prosecutor's office to court for declaring your media outlet an undesirable organization. Editor Thomas Nielsen stated, "No dark shadows from the Kremlin walls will ever be able to stop our journalism." However, the reality is that you are unlikely to win this case, at least not under the current regime in Russia. So why are you pursuing it?
First of all, I think it is more important than ever that we journalists stand up and protect our rights to do independent and free journalism. In these times, we are under growing pressure, and dictatorships like Russia are very interested in shutting our mouths and shutting down our journalism and repressing free voices. So the Barents Observer is not ready to accept that we are being blocked, that we are being declared undesirable, that the Russian authorities are trying to shut us down, that the Russian authorities are declaring our editor-in-chief persona non grata, etc., etc. So that's why we think it's very important, principally, to actually take Russian authorities to court. And the latest, as you said, the latest round of court processes is this one. It's against the Russian General Prosecutor. We are taking the prosecutor office to court because we find it completely illegitimate that we are declared undesirable, so-called undesirable, for doing free and independent fact-based journalism.
So who is representing you in Russia? How does the process work?
We have a very good helper in this process. There is a team of very clever Russian lawyers, independent and free Russian lawyers who operate from abroad. They all had to leave Russia first of all, following the full-scale war, and are located in Europe now. And one of these are helping us in this case. He has assistants inside Russia who help with some practical issues, and that's why we are able to take this court case. And court hearings are taking place almost as we speak. There has been a first round of court hearings, and there will be one more very soon. So this is a process ongoing, and as you said, we are of course not expecting to win this case. That's impossible to win such cases in today's Russia, but it will still force the Russian authorities and the Russian general prosecutor to look at the case, and we are confronting them. We don't lay down on our back. This is happening in Moscow. It's Tverskoy Rayonny Sud in Moscow. It's all taking place in the capital.
What does it actually mean to be designated an undesirable organization in Russia? And for context, in February 2025, the Barents Observer won a case in the European Court of Human Rights regarding illegal blocking, because you have been blocked in Russia even before that. And the very next day, the Russian Prosecutor General's office declared your publication undesirable. So what does it mean?
To be declared so-called undesirable in Russia means that there are certain restrictions on our activities inside Russia. And for example, anyone who reposts a social media post from us face criminal charges. Anyone who we talk to inside Russia face criminal charges. And the same goes for people who share information to us or about us. So there are potential severe consequences for people inside Russia if they somehow cooperate with an undesirable media. And unfortunately, we are not the only undesirable media, so-called undesirable media inside Russia. There are quickly growing number of media and also other organizations that are being declared undesirable by the Russian authorities. And as you said, for the Barents Observer, this is part of a longer process. We took the Russian authorities to court also after we were blocked in 2019. And of course, we lost that case in the Russian court system, but we took the case subsequently to Strasbourg, to the European Court of Human Rights. And on the 6th of February this year, we got the verdict from Strasbourg and we won that case. And then on the 7th of February, the day after, we got a letter from the general prosecutor in Moscow that we were so-called undesirable. So these two processes are indeed, we believe, very closely connected.
How much are you flattered by the fact that Russia is paying that attention to you? You are, of course, doing a great job there in Kirkenes and covering all the issues, but still, you are just basically a few people. But it seems that Russia is paying quite extensive attention to you. Why is that so?
First of all, I think that the Russian authorities of today are very, very afraid of independent media. And the Barents Observer publishes in Russia, so we do have an audience inside the country. So they are afraid of free voices. They're afraid of the Russian audiences, of the Russian population, access to free and independent information that are not in line with the positions of the Russian authorities. So that's why they are cracking down on all media that are working with investigative journalism, with stories that are contradicting their views. And you are right, the Barents Observer is a very small media, so why should they pay attention? I think it is because we are publishing in Russian, that we do have substantial audiences in parts of Russia, and also that we are covering a region of very big importance for Russia in a security setting. The Kola Peninsula is militarily a very important part of the Russian armed capacities, and this is a region that we are covering pretty closely. So, yes, we are small, but we have a voice in Russia, and yes, you're right, it's quite flattering that they are paying so much attention to us.
Of course, you mentioned Kola Peninsula, and you're absolutely right. It is very, very important from the security point of view. So, what's next? Are you going to be designating as spies in Russia or something like that?
Journalists are not spies. We are doing fact-based journalism, and we are collecting information, open information, and making stories. That's the thing about being a journalism, that we try to find out what's going on. We use all available sources to get as many details as we can, and we publish the stories we make. What will be next? We don't expect that the authorities in Putin's Russia will stop harassing media. We expect that to continue. We expect it will be even harder to do journalism inside Russia for the few ones who are left, and it will be even harder to find out for us journalists who are based outside Russia. It will be even harder to find out what's going on inside the country. So journalism is getting more and more difficult, but at the same time more important.
I understand that in the past, even the Russian Security Service, FSB, has attempted to disrupt your work, asking Norwegian authorities to intervene. What happened in that situation?
We do have a quite long history with confronting Russian authorities, and the case you refer to dates back to 2014, when we know from reliable sources that the Russian FSB, the Russian Federal Security Service, actually requested Norwegian authorities to shut the Barents Observer down. That was a time when the Barents Observer had a slightly different ownership model. We were at that time a part of a Norwegian public organization. I guess the FSB thought it would be possible to simply close us down, but of course that's not the way it works in Norway and the rest of Europe. So we continue to work and we continue to live, and today we are fully independent and owned by the journalists ourselves.
How complicated is it to get news from Russia, to report from Russia? Because you said you are also publishing in Russian, but your journalists probably essentially cannot set foot on Russia's soil at this moment. I saw also the news that one of them, Denis Agora, was recently fined by Russia, despite the fact that he has been working in Norway since 2022. So how are you managing to report from Russia?
It is increasingly difficult. Russia is introducing pretty much all the time new censorship regulations, and at the same time the self-censorship among Russians and many others is also increasing. The policy of intimidation is quite effective, that people are increasingly afraid to speak and to share information about what's going on. It is harder to get information, but it's not impossible. We continue to use several sources of information where we can get at least parts of the picture. There is anything from satellite sources, databases, and there's still quite much information available on social media. Telegram is, of course, important. You can still find interesting information on Kontakte or VK, which is a social media a bit like Facebook, which is very, very heavily regulated, but still you can find information there, and several other sources. So it's getting harder, but it's not impossible yet.
You live in Kirkenes, right on Norway's border with Russia. When I visited Kirkenes in 2014, it was a very nice visit, I have to say. There was still significant cross-border cooperation, even after the annexation of Crimea and the beginning of the war in eastern Ukraine. And of course, Norway, as a NATO member, also shared a border with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. So how would you describe the current state of Norway-Russia relations?
Norway shares land border with Russia, and it also shares vast territories of marine areas in the Barents Sea with Russia. We are two neighboring countries that have pretty extensive proximity to each other. So there is a long history of relations between Norway and Russia. And Norway is a very small country, and we have been trying to balance between Eastern and Western interests. Of course, we have always been a NATO member, and we have always been part of the Western block, so to say. But when things really started to change in the late 1980s, early 1990s, Norway very soon took the initiative to an extension of relations between the two countries. And over 30 years, Norway invested quite big resources and lots of energy on building a new and better relationship with the eastern neighbor. And in Kirkenes, which is located pretty much on the border between the countries, this small town became a hub for cross-border activities, and Norway wanted Kirkenes to be a contact point, a kind of a bridge between the two countries where could experiment with projects within culture, within environment, and etc., etc. And there was also a quite strong regional political cooperation between northern Norwegian regions and northern Russian regions. When you visited Kirkenes in 2014, pretty much all of this was still intact. And Kirkenes was very proud of actually being a border town. But of course, already back then, it was evident that things were changing. There had been signals for several years already, but in 2014, things really changed, and it became even clearer in which direction Russia was moving. The annexation of Crimea was indeed very dramatic. And the Barents Observer already then warned about the consequences of this annexation for cross-border cooperation in the north. And we were pretty right. What we saw in the years following 2014 was a rapid deterioration, worsening of relations. And today, none of this is left. The few things that were left before February 2022 is no longer there. There's no cross-border cooperation left between Norway and Russia, with the exception of a few meetings between the coast guards and the border guards. Although the border is not closed, but the traffic between the two countries is very small compared to what it used to be. It's a kind of a sad story. There was, if you look 20, 25 years back, there was lots of optimism. We thought that Russia would develop into a partner that we could work closely with, but then we ended up with something completely different. So it's been interesting history. It's been interesting to live in Kirkenes this years, and it's still interesting to live in Kirkenes, but for other reasons, so to say.
There were stories in the past that migrants from Russia were crossing the border to Norway and that Russia is sending them. Is it still a phenomenon or not that much so?
This is not happening anymore. It is in 2015, we saw, 2014, 2015, we saw a rather big number of migrants coming up to the Kola Peninsula and trying to cross, and also successfully crossing the border to Norway and later also Finland, actually. It really put Norway off guard. This came out of nothing, and Norway was very unprepared for this kind of migrant flow. I mean, this is the Arctic, this is far north, and temperatures can drop very far down. So in the middle of this, we saw lots of migrants from countries that are far in the south. At that time, many Syrians, but also Africans, different African nations. What is the consequence? What is the conclusion afterwards? Is that this was indeed a kind of a hybrid attack, closely planned by Russia and used as a way to test Norway and to test Finland. And it was rather successfully for the Russian side, I believe. Norway was not prepared. Norway had a rather chaotic situation and had problems coping with these 5,000 migrants. And the same applied for Finland shortly later. Finland got a new wave of migrant crossing over the border. Approximately 1 year ago, Finland decided to close all its border to Russia. So there's no cross-border traffic at all between Finland and Russia any longer. Norway still has one border crossing point, the only one between the countries, which is still open, but there are very strong restrictions on cross-border traffic. Living on the border to Russia is always interesting. It's always rather unpredictable, and at the moment, mostly in a negative sense.
So you mentioned the hybrid attack that Russia was testing Norway by sending migrants. And this will be my final question. We often talk about the Baltic countries or Finland when discussing regional and European security. But how much is Norway concerned? Or is there any discussion in the society about this? How much is Norway concerned about the potential Russian military attack?
Of course, Norway is a neighboring country to Russia, and Ukraine is a neighboring country to Russia. Ukraine's borders are internationally recognized by the world. So for any neighboring country to Russia, the invasion of Ukraine is of very serious concern. It shows that we cannot trust Russia, today's Russia. There are, of course, great concerns in Norway about the situation. I think there is no danger of a kind of a military invasion in Norway, like we have seen in Ukraine. But there are many ways to do warfare these days, and there are many ways to try to destabilize a neighboring country. And we know that Russia is pretty active in this field, not only towards Norway, of course, but towards many countries in Europe. And there are lots of examples of this kind of hybrid attacks, also about sabotage acts. Of course, there is a concern about the situation at sea between Norway and Russia. There is concern about the situation in Svalbard, where Russia has a quite significant presence. There are concerns also on the mainland, but we will not see Russian tanks crossing the border to Kirkenes. Also, if you look at the Russian military bases that are located quite close to Norway, they are significantly weakened compared to what they were before the full-scale war against Ukraine. Lots of men have been sent to the war, lots of men, hundreds and even thousands have been killed. Lots of military hardware, lots of vehicles, tanks, etc., has been lost. So these bases, some of them based only like 30 kilometers from Norway, they are significantly weakened, and it will take some time to rebuild them. As long as the full-scale war against Ukraine is continuing, Russia is unlikely to be able to rebuild them to what they were before the war at the moment. But things could change, and that's, of course, a big concern.
This was another episode of my podcast, The Global Agora. Subscribe, listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on the other platforms. If you enjoy what I do, please support me on Ko-fi. For the link, see also the description of this episode. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned.